Married to Daniel, who is 30. I am Elena, a 28-year-old. Married for 3 years. We have been together for 6. Everything was great when we initially got together. Daniel seemed like the perfect mate. He was nice and attentive. Our future hopes, ideals, and goals were the same. I really felt I had discovered the one. But it soon became evident that I had married Janice, Daniel's mother, as well as him. Janice is 56, and from the first day, she made it quite plain that no one would ever be good enough for her priceless kid. I first laughed off her tiny remarks as usual mother-in-law behavior. She would note that our apartment was too messy for someone who wanted a family, or that my cooking wasn't exactly to Daniel's taste. She would reorganize my kitchen as I was cooking when she came over for supper. She would mock and tell me how she would have done it better if I were decorating a room. I kept telling myself she would finally warm up to me if I stayed calm and patient. But once Daniel and I were married, things became more intense. Janice first began coming up without notice. Exhausted from work, I would find her seated on our couch with takeout when I got home. She thought Daniel would be hungry. She even rearranged our furniture while I was away, saying it would make the house more welcoming. It was really annoying. But I let it go since Daniel would simply laugh it off and say, "That's just mom being mom." I did not want to be the wife who made him decide between his mother and me. About a year into our marriage, there was a first actual blowout. Just the two of us, Daniel and I had scheduled a subdued anniversary meal at home. I bought a good bottle of wine, spent the entire afternoon cooking his preferred dinner, and laid candles on the table. That evening should have been flawless and romantic. Janice stepped in right as we were seated to eat. No contact, no text. She arrived with a casserole dish, saying she didn't want us to feel alone on our anniversary. Naturally, Daniel asked her to stay. That was it. While Daniel contentedly followed Janice's lead, I watched the rest of the evening as she dominated the conversation. I told Daniel how unhappy I was when she departed. His answer is, "She's just trying to be nice. It's not a big deal." That evening I knew we had a major issue. I advised couples therapy, believing we could address establishing some limits with his mother. Daniel promised he would speak with Janice, but nothing changed. He promptly closed it down, arguing we didn't need outside help to deal with family issues. She continued to arrive uninvited, berating everything I did and behaving as though our house belonged to her. Daniel either made apologies for her or ignored it. The financial problems then got underway. Janice would phone Daniel, distraught about some emergency, a car repair, a medical expense, or a house fix she couldn't afford. Daniel would withdraw from our shared savings without even notifying me, and I would only learn later by looking over our account. "She's my mom. What am I supposed to do?" he would ask when I challenged him. I thought I was engaged in a losing struggle. Janice's wants always came first, and in her own marriage I felt like a third wheel all the time. The holidays were always especially trying. The turning point came on Thanksgiving at Janice's. She would hand Daniel a plate of food without even mentioning me, and loudly tell everyone how she missed the good old days when Daniel still lived at home. She spent the whole evening making passive-aggressive remarks about how I didn't understand family traditions and needed to loosen up. I tried to smile and take it, but I lost it when she started bragging about how Daniel still came to her for advice, as he knew who really had his back. I drew Daniel aside and told him I wouldn't be able to tolerate her conduct anymore. Once more brushing me aside, he said, "That's just how she is. Don't let it get to you." He claimed he was caught in the middle and didn't want to disturb any of us, but I told him I wanted him to speak out for me, for us. It felt as though I was chatting to a stone wall. The last straw arrived when Janice personally challenged me. She said I was shattering their family and accused me of wanting to steal her son. I felt shocked. Daniel insisted I must have misinterpreted her when I told him about it. I understood then he was never going to put me first. I had tried every trick to make this work. I had had several talks with Daniel, urged him to see my viewpoint, and even got in touch with Janice in search of some commonality. Nothing had any effect. I was unsure at this point of what else to do. Though I loved Daniel, I couldn't live like this. I began to question whether our marriage was really worth saving since I felt I was vying with Janice for his attention. I sought some guidance, so I turned to Reddit. I wanted to know if my expectations of my husband's giving our marriage top priority were insane. Was this as screwed as it felt, or was I asking too much? Update 1. As Daniel's birthday approached, I wanted to do something memorable. Just the two of us, I set aside a peaceful dinner at home. I had already decided on his preferred dinner, and even hired a babysitter for our dog so we could spend a whole evening without interruptions. That seemed to be the ideal celebration approach. Naturally, though, Janice had other ideas. She called him roughly 1 week before his birthday to let him know she was planning a party. She only told him she was having something and expected us to show up. She didn't inquire whether we had any plans. When Daniel mentioned it casually to me, I reminded him of the supper I had scheduled. He shrugged and replied, "We can do both." The way he phrased it, though, made it abundantly evident which one he considered more crucial. A few days later, Janice phoned once more. She persuaded Daniel this time that it would be too much to have 2 celebrations, and that it would make more sense to have the party at her house. When he told me, I questioned his sincerity. "It's just 1 day. Why not let her do this for me?" he asked me, as if I were overreacting. I stayed quiet, though at this point I lacked the will to battle him on it. I was wounded. I so called off the supper I had scheduled and accepted whatever show Janice had in mind. When we got to her house, it was precisely what I had anticipated. Extravagant and focused primarily on her. Giant banners declaring, "Happy Birthday, Daniel," and balloons in every hue imaginable dominated the garish and incongruous decor. She had invited family, friends, even some of Daniel's colleagues. Though none of the meals on the piled-high table Daniel especially enjoyed, Janice acted as though she had gone out of her way to cook all his favorites. Janice was at it in minutes of arrival. She smiled passively-aggressively and said something about how worn out I appeared. Then, when Daniel welcomed guests, she made sure to let everyone know how much work she had put into the celebration. She said once, quite loudly, that someone hadn't even bothered to send a cake, so it was good she had taken care of it. The gift opening produced the last straw. Janice leaned over and remarked, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe now you'll actually get some decent meals at home." One of Daniel's colleagues had given him a set of grilling tools. I was done. Some folks laughed uncomfortably. Rising, I asked whether we might have a private conversation. Janice shrugged me off and declared, "Oh, don't be so sensitive, it's a joke." It was at that point I lost it. I told her this was about the continual disrespect, not about the joke. I informed her that I hadn't scheduled this party, and that in my own marriage I wouldn't be sitting there and subjected to treatment like an outsider. The space fell silent. Ever the actress, Janice put her hand to her chest like I had just done. She murmured something about not believing I would ruin Daniel's birthday like this. Daniel simply stood there, silent, staring at me. I watched him, waiting for him to intervene or at least notice what was occurring. He didn't. I left accordingly. I got my suitcase, left the door, and drove home. Though he stayed at the celebration, I assumed Daniel would follow me. Furious when he eventually returned home hours later, he charged me with overreaction and scene building. He said I had wrecked his birthday and embarrassed him in front of his friends and relatives. He wouldn't hear it, but I reminded him Janice was the one who began it. "That is just how she is. Why can't you just ignore it?" he asked. The following day I mentioned therapy once more. I informed him our marriage wouldn't survive if he didn't set limits with Janice, and that we cannot keep living like this. This time, he consented grudgingly. 1 week later, our first session started. Daniel's enmeshment with Janice caught the therapist right away, and she noted how dysfunctional their relationship was. Saying it was unfair to blame his mother for caring so much, Daniel fought back and said she was simply trying to help. Janice, meanwhile, wasted no time disparaging me after learning about the therapy sessions, probably thanks to Daniel. She said to the entire family I was brainwashing Daniel against her and called me theatrical for dragging Daniel into this mess. But for the first time, I sensed someone on my side. The therapist confirmed all I had been going through and pushed Daniel to see things from my point of view. Clearly, though, he wasn't ready to give up his allegiance to Janice. He continued to justify her behavior, and each time the therapist advised establishing limits, he would move uneasily in his chair. Following the therapy session and the party disaster, I began to doubt whether things would ever turn around. On Reddit, I penned another update including all that had transpired. People telling me I was right to stand my position arrived flooding in the comments. Some even advised considering a departure plan should Daniel not begin giving our marriage top priority. I was allowing treatment for now, but I had no idea how long I could hang on. Updated 2. Not long after the birthday catastrophe, things started to go badly quite rapidly. Janice began phoning Daniel more regularly, each time bringing fresh issues she claimed only he could address. At first, it was small stuff. She needed help repairing an item or servicing her automobile. She then dropped the bomb, unable to afford emergency medical bills. Crying, she phoned Daniel and said she had no idea what to do as the costs kept mounting. She seemed urgent without adding many specifics. Of course, Daniel hurried to save her without thinking through everything with me. To pay her bills, he took a sizable outlay of money from our shared funds. I first learned about this while looking at the account to move some money for a scheduled house renovation project, and noticed the withdrawal. He didn't even seem to believe it was a significant matter when I asked him about it. Grasping, he muttered, "She's my mom. What was I supposed to do? Let her suffer?" Making decisions like that without first consulting me was unacceptable, I informed him. Though his tone made it plain he didn't really see an issue with what he'd done, he swore it wouldn't happen again. A few days later, I was in the room while Janice was on the phone with Daniel. She laughed and told him she was appreciative she could count on him. She casually said to someone in the background, loud enough for me to hear, that it was good to know Daniel always puts family first. Her manner of saying it caused my blood to heat. She seemed to be rubbing it in my face. I raised it in our next therapy appointment. Pointing out that it strained our marriage's relationship, the therapist asked Daniel why he omitted involving me in the choice. Defensive and claiming it was just one time, Daniel argued I was overreacting. Daniel snapped when the therapist pushed back and said his behaviors were encouraging Janice's behavior. He bolted from the appointment, leaving me seated with the therapist trying to decide what to do going forward. Then I made the decision to handle things myself. I started shifting some of my money into a different bank account. I told Daniel later on, but I knew I had to guard myself should this recur. Certainly enough, it did. Janice phoned Daniel once more, this time asking him to co-sign a loan for her. She assured him it would be only temporary and claimed she needed it to pay off some debt. I set down my foot when Daniel mentioned it to me. Our marriage would end if he co-signed that debt, I warned him. I wasn't acting in a blustery fashion. Living in a position where Janice controlled our finances more than I did would not be acceptable. Daniel appeared caught between two. He insisted he didn't want to disappoint her, but he also didn't want to lose me. I momentarily felt he might really pay attention to me. One evening then, I discovered loan documentation on the kitchen counter. His name already showed up on it. That marked it. That evening I left after packing a suitcase. When I phoned a friend to ask if I might spend some time with her, she greeted me warmly. Daniel started texting and calling incessantly when he got home and discovered I was gone. Saying he was only trying to maintain peace and he didn't mean to hurt me, he asked me to come back. Janice, meanwhile, spent little time disseminating her version of events. She carefully omitted the portion in which she coerced Daniel into sacrificing our financial stability for her personal benefit, telling the family I had abandoned Daniel because I couldn't tolerate being married to someone with a close family. I updated Reddit about all that had happened while at my friend's house. The support was unbounded. People were telling me I needed to put myself first, that I deserved more, and that Daniel's allegiance to his mother would never alter until he worked at it. I felt less alone as some even related comparable stories. Now I found myself at a crossroads. After 2 weeks of staying with a friend, Daniel had been texting me daily, stating he was ready to return to therapy and work on things. Actually, though, I wasn't sure I believed him. Janice still had such a hold on him, and I had no idea whether he was really ready or able to release it. I was giving divorce top thought. Though I didn't make this decision lightly, I couldn't keep living this way. Though I couldn't compete with Daniel's mother for my lifetime, I loved him. Though I hadn't decided yet, one thing was very evident. Something had to change, that marriage was done. Third update. 2 weeks after I moved out, Daniel called me and advised a family meeting to clear the air. He thought it would be a good way to handle everything. Janice's conduct, the financial problems, and the strain on our marriage. I first hesitated. That nothing useful would result from it made me dubious. But Daniel seemed driven to right things. Thus, against my better judgment, I agreed. Janice's house was scheduled for the Saturday afternoon gathering. To prevent any embarrassing grand entrances, I came early. Daniel arrived already, fidgety in the living room. Naturally, in full hostess form, Janice presented coffee and pastries as though this were some laid-back get-together. Among Daniel's relatives that trickled in were his aunt, uncle, and one cousin. Their presence added to the suspense. I couldn't tell whether they were there to help Janice, Daniel, or me. Daniel began by outlining why we were there once everyone was seated. He mentioned the problems between Janice and me, the financial pressure, and how it was hurting our marriage. With arms folded, Janice sat there, seeming to be waiting for her time on stage. When Daniel came home, I gently put out my complaints. I discussed the financial treachery, the lack of limits, and how I thought Janice had been eroding our marriage from the beginning. Janice leaped in before I could even finish. She claimed she couldn't believe I was airing dirty laundry front of house. She began to discuss all the sacrifices she had made for Daniel, how she only wanted to help, and how painful it was to be called manipulative. With every sentence, her voice grew louder and more dramatic. It was like seeing a soap opera develop live. When Daniel's aunt tried to intervene, pointing out Janice's behavior might be contributing to the issue, Janice wasn't having it. She added that if someone here deserved an apology, it was her, and accused the aunt of siding with me. Claiming she had proof that I had been turning Daniel against her, she even brought out her phone and started reading through messages. She waved the phone about but never really showed people the texts. Janice remarked, "Do you really think I'm the problem here?" At one point, turning to Daniel. "Daniel, stop." He turned to look at his mother, then back at me. He murmured something about not wanting to pick sides instead of responding. That was just what Janice required. Rising, she pointed at me and exclaimed, "See? Even Daniel knows you're the one causing all this drama." I got up from there, unable to sit. I grabbed my phone and opened the screenshots I had saved of the texts Janice had written to Daniel, ones in which she badmouthed me, lied about needing money, and even paraded our therapy sessions. "If anyone wants to see the truth, here it is," I said to Daniel's uncle as I passed the phone. As Daniel's uncle began reading through the texts, the room fell still. He handed the phone to his wife, who gave her head a disbelieving shake. Janice began stammering, claiming the messages were manipulated or taken out of context to discredit her, but it was too late. There was damage done. Daniel studied the messages, his face white. I briefly considered him maybe standing up to her at last. Rather, he advised, "Mom, maybe we should step back and think about this." That was all. No apologies, no responsibility, only a hazy recommendation to think about her actions. Understanding she was losing the room, Janice changed strategy. Saying she couldn't believe her own kid would doubt her integrity, she began to cry. Turning to Daniel, she said, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Daniel did not reply. He sat there staring at his hands. Rising, I collected my luggage and said to Daniel I was done. I said I couldn't keep battling for a marriage in which I was always second place. I left, turning away Janice's dramatic sobs and the relatives' hushes. Story 2. I never imagined spilling the beans about my sister, but here I am. My own Chloe screwed me over, divided our property, and left me with almost nothing. A year ago, I would have laughed at Chloe's antics. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but I never believed she'd go this low. Return to the start. Chloe and I were opposites as kids. Me? As the quiet one, I always read. Excellent grades, rules observed, etc. The wild child was Chloe, couldn't disappoint our parents. If she erred, oh, that's just Chloe being Chloe. What if I considered crossing the line? Result, repercussions. Which households have a golden child? Her name was Chloe. I didn't detest her for it. Maybe I should have, but I accepted it. We thought things would balance out as we aged. We'd be equals, sibling rivalry would end, etc. I was mistaken. Our parents weren't rich, but they worked hard and left a respectable legacy earlier this year. They always told me they would split 50-50 with Chloe. Simple, right? It should have. However, Chloe rigged the game. I don't know the dirty details, but when the will was executed, she got the house, savings, and virtually everything else, was left with scraps. My initial disbelief. Must be a mistake. I reread the documentation a million times to figure out what went wrong. After contacting the lawyer, it was clear this wasn't a clerical error. After playing the long game, Chloe did well. She planned behind the scenes to win as I grieved our parents. I expected her to seem ashamed or excuse it when I approached her. No, she was freezing. I was closer to Mom and Dad, she continued, as if that gave her more. I cared for them better than you. You don't need it like I do. Not believing my hearing, like she rewrote history, she thought she was the perfect daughter while I did nothing. I wasn't around as much in their last years. My life and job kept me busy, but I didn't neglect them. I called, visited, and checked on them. That didn't matter to Chloe. She apparently had the right to steal what wasn't hers because she lived closer and accomplished more. Not even anger describes it. A devastating betrayal. Not only was the money involved, but my sister did this to me. How can you comprehend that? I attempted to convince her this was wrong, but she wouldn't budge. She had the arrogance to urge me to be grateful for what I had. Grateful. That word still enrages me. Now what? Some part of me wants to never speak to her again. Another part wants to fight for my rights. I've researched legal possibilities, and it's difficult. Chloe hid her activity, and going to court would involve our whole family in a public struggle. Speaking of family, I've heard conflicting opinions from relatives. They say I should let it go since family is more important than money. Others support me but are afraid to act. Others believe Chloe was right. She supposedly deserved more because she was around later. They ignore the fact that our parents didn't desire this. Feeling stuck. I lose what I own if I let go. But fighting could further divide the family. Actually, I'm exhausted. Everything is draining me. Some days I want to sue, others I want to go on. What would you do? Let it go or fight? I keep vacillating and don't know the solution. My relationship with Chloe will change forever. After everything with Chloe, I assumed some family would support me. To get encouragement, I confided in certain relatives. Family matters are never straightforward. My aunt, my mom's sister, was my first contact. She's always been talkable. I told her how Chloe stole most of the inheritance, leaving me almost nothing. She seemed shocked, but then hesitant. You know, Chloe was really involved in your parents' care towards the end, stated. She gave up a lot to be there for them. Hearing this was unbelievable. Yes, Chloe was around more, but I was still there for them. Always visited, called, checked in. My input seemed insignificant because I wasn't there every day. I told them our parents didn't want this. They wanted 50-50, no exceptions. But my aunt merely sighed and looked like I should accept it and move on. You have to understand, Sarah, remarked. She probably felt like she deserved more because of how much she did for them. Merited more? Doing the right thing was more important than deserving. But explaining things to her was like talking to a stone wall. I felt more alone than ever. Unfortunately, it wasn't just my aunt that supported Chloe. Other family members, especially distant relatives, had similar reactions. Chloe was more involved in our parents' final years and made sacrifices that I didn't, everyone said. It was like rewriting history to make Chloe the hero and myself the villain. It hurt because they supported her and erased what I did. Worse, nobody wanted involved. My supporters who thought Chloe did wrong didn't say anything. They were frightened to stir the pot. I saw Chloe act fine while I was upset and alone. She flaunted her new wealth, adding insult to injury. She didn't just take most of the fortune, she pushed it on me. She flaunted her new SUV, which she could never afford, on social media. New clothes, holidays, and luxury dinners followed. Every time I opened Instagram or Facebook, she was living it up while I was scraping by. Not just the money, but public humiliation. Every time Chloe flaunted her newfound fortune, it felt like a slap. Naturally, everyone noticed. Friends wrote me questioning how Chloe could buy this since our family was poor. Was I meant to say, "Oh, she stole most of the inheritance"? Humiliating. Resentment grew daily. We felt broken in our already strained relationship. Except for passive-aggressive texts, we stopped talking. Half of me wanted to approach her again and truly have it, but another half thought it wouldn't matter. She had what Chloe wanted, therefore she didn't care. I seriously considered legal action. A lawyer informed me I had a case, but it would be difficult. Chloe had so managed the situation that untangling it would take time and money. It would entail putting the family through a long, unpleasant court battle that would ruin all our relationships. I was torn there. Do I fight for what's mine, even if it hurts the family? Should I let it go to preserve the fragile peace? Family and harmony have always been important to me, but at what cost? Some days I wake up ready to fight, while others I want to forget it all. I feel increasingly exhausted as this continues. This weight on my chest won't go away. Not even I recognize myself. I avoided controversy and preferred a win-win outcome. Always angry, bitter, and resentful. Even worth it? Should I battle for what's mine or leave and keep my sanity? I know letting this go will chew me up for a long time. Resisting is like opening a door I can't close. What would you do in my situation? Is it worth breaking your family apart to defend yourself? Can you let go even if it means losing something you can never get back? She reached out when I thought I was done with Chloe, and not as expected.
It has been weeks since we chatted. After the treachery, the inheritance-fueled spending spree, and the animosity, I was ready to cut her off. If she could accept her actions, so could I.
She texted unexpectedly, "Hey, can we talk?" At first I ignored it. Wasn't into her theatrics. I felt sick when another message arrived. I'm in trouble. I called her against my better judgment. Something in her speech made me irritated and fascinated. Chloe wasn't living the high life as her Instagram photos suggested. She'd wasted much of the fortune on impulsive purchases and lousy investments. The new car? Leased. The getaways. Purchased on credit. She said she had no financial strategy and was in debt with creditors hounding her. She now asked for my help in a strange twist. The brazenness. The same Chloe who twisted her way into collecting most of our parents' wealth was now crying for my help because she'd spent all the money she felt entitled to, like a cosmic joke. I let her talk, partially out of astonishment and partly to learn how bad it was. At first she attempted to dismiss it as a momentary setback, but she was clearly in over her head. She was desperate and afraid. I was swept up in emotions as she spoke. Anger, satisfaction, disbelief, and oddly, sympathy. How could she beg for my help after everything she'd done? A slap in the face. I felt twisted satisfaction, like retribution had caught up with her. She stole my everything, and now she was losing it. I loathed her for what she did, but I felt guilty. She remained my sister. Before money and favoritism poisoned everything, we grew up together and were close. As children, we stayed up late in our shared bedroom, whispering about our goals and promising to always be there for one another. Before life got complicated, I trusted Chloe most. That bond stayed deep inside despite everything. So she asked me for help. I didn't answer her call, told her I needed time to consider. She seemed grateful that I was considering it. After we hung up, I was conflicted. Should I aid her? Knowing what she did, could I help? Was this another ploy to obtain something from me because she had no one else? This felt like a moral conflict. On one hand, I owed her nothing. After choosing, Chloe had to live with the consequences. Helping her seemed like rewarding her for creating suffering. However, abandoning her in her actual fragility was terrible. She was my sister. That bond, however frayed, was hard to break. She claimed she felt lost and had no way out, and I kept thinking about it. Her desperation reminded me that she was human, fallible, and in over her head. My mind kept wondering if this was another of her machinations. She may have learned nothing. Maybe she wanted a bailout to return to her old life without considering the damage she caused. It was hard to trust anymore. Despite wanting to end this chapter, I couldn't let go. Even after betrayal, was family too vital to leave? Or was this another trap for Chloe to achieve what she wanted without taking responsibility? Not knowing what to do, I considered leaving her to clean up her mess. But another part of me felt guilty, like I'd regret not helping her. What would you do? Would you aid a traitor? Is there a time where you must leave even with family? I'm considering leaving, but I'm not sure I can. Maybe I still hope Chloe can change, even if she's shown me otherwise.